My daughter-in-law invited me to her fancy birthday bash just so she could humiliate me in front of everyone. She told them all I was nothing but the pathetic old lady she had to put up with out of pity. I didn't argue. I didn't explain a thing. I just showed up. When I stepped out of that white Rolls-Royce with 2 bodyguards right behind me and her own father walked straight past her, heading right for me, that was the moment everything she'd built up about me came crashing down. The first thing I noticed wasn't the fancy card. It was the smug little smirk on my daughter-in-law's face. She slapped that gold-embossed invitation right down on the kitchen table, exactly where I sit every morning with my coffee. Mom, I'm throwing my 60th at the plaza downtown. It's going to be super exclusive, she said in that tone that really meant you don't belong there. Ever since my husband passed, Vivian had treated me like an old piece of furniture she kept forgetting to toss out. My son Logan just stared awkwardly at his phone, the way he always did whenever she took a dig at me. In her eyes, I was just the widow stuck in the little ground floor apartment of our multi-family house, the old lady they used for babysitting and cleaning up after them. She'd already started dipping into my savings, sweet-talking Logan into using our joint accounts for her lifestyle needs. They figured I was weak because I stayed quiet. But silence isn't weakness. It's watching, waiting. I picked up the invitation and felt the thick, expensive paper between my fingers. This was going to be one hell of a party paid for with the money my late husband and I had busted our butts to earn over decades. Vivian eyed my simple cardigan. Just don't show up in your usual stuff. Okay. There'll be important people there, even some of my dad's business partners. She wanted me there to highlight how far she'd come and how far I'd supposedly fallen. She wanted to parade the contrast between her sparkling world and my broke one. What she didn't know was that I'd already caught her rerouting bills in my name weeks earlier. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't fought. Instead, I'd quietly set up a meeting at my bank. I'll be there. Vivian, I said, calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. My gaze stayed steady, my voice didn't waver one bit. Logan glanced up, clearly surprised I'd agreed so fast. Vivian flashed a triumphant grin, convinced I'd embarrass myself in front of her fancy crowd that night. She had no clue I'd already started revoking the powers of attorney on the house accounts she'd been raiding so shamelessly. The game was on. But I was the one writing the rules. Over the next few days, I kept things low-key. Vivian bossed me around like I was her personal maid. Mom, can you throw in a load of laundry? I've got a fitting for my dress, she'd yell down the stairs. I didn't say much, I just handled what needed handling. For myself, I started moving my private papers and my husband's valuable keepsakes into a safe only I could access. It wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. When you've helped build a company for 40 years, you learn how to read the books. I saw exactly how much Vivian was blowing on this birthday blowout. She'd booked the top-shelf catering, rented a stretch limo, everything charged to the company account that Logan technically ran, even though most of the shares still belonged to me. My son was either blinded by love or just too comfortable to push back. He'd forgotten who actually built the foundation that let him live so easy. I paid a visit to an old friend of my husband's, Mr. Harlan. He ran a high-end private car service and still owed my husband a big favor from way back. We didn't get emotional, we talked business. Eleanor, it would be my honor, he said when I laid out what I needed. I didn't need a lawyer to sort out my position in the house. I just needed control over what was rightfully mine. Evenings, I'd sit in my kitchen, listening to the loud laughter drifting down from upstairs. They were already celebrating their supposed victory over the old lady. Vivian had even hinted that my ground floor space would make a great playroom for the grandkids soon. She talked about me like I was already gone. I rested my hand on the cool wood of the table. This house carried my whole story. Thinking I'd just roll over and hand it to them was their biggest mistake. I brushed a strand of hair from my face and gave a small, cool smile. Tomorrow, their world was going to look a whole lot different. The night of the party was cool and crisp. The Plaza Hotel downtown was all lit up like a movie set. Valet guys were juggling luxury cars and guests in tuxes and evening gowns streamed inside. Vivian stood in the lobby, poured into a dress that probably cost more than my first car. She sipped champagne and scanned the crowd, clearly hoping to spot me sneaking in wearing some old coat so she could pity me to her friends. But I didn't walk up, and I sure didn't take the bus. Everything went quiet at the entrance when a gleaming white Rolls-Royce Ghost rolled smoothly into the driveway. Streetlights danced across the hood like it was straight out of a glossy magazine. People held their breath. Even the hotel manager stepped outside to greet the VIP personally. I caught Vivian's face through the car window. Confusion turned to pure shock. One of the two broad-shouldered guys in dark suits Harlan had sent them opened the door. They looked more like bodyguards than drivers. I stepped out in a tailored charcoal silk suit I'd kept in the closet for years. My hair was pulled back neatly, my eyes clear and unflinching. I didn't need diamonds to command the room. My presence was enough. I felt every gaze on me. Some guests recognized me from the old days when my husband and I ran the company. Vivian stood frozen. Her glass trembled in her hand. Logan beside her looked like he'd seen a ghost. He took a half step toward me, but I ignored him for now. My eyes locked on Vivian. In that moment, she realized the woman she'd spent months belittling had never really gone anywhere. I'd just been patient. Before Vivian could even open her mouth, someone else pushed through the crowd. It was her father, Richard Caldwell, a tough, successful real estate developer known for playing hardball. He practically rushed over to me, his face lighting up with surprise and real respect. Eleanor Whitaker, I can't believe I'm running into you here. He boomed loud enough for everyone within 10 feet to hear. He completely ignored his daughter and took both my hands in his. Vivian went ghostly pale. I thought she might faint. She'd always told her dad I was a broke widow she was kindly looking after. Now she watched her own hero, her powerful father, treat me like royalty. It's been too long since your husband's company wrapped up, Richard went on. I've never forgotten how you stepped in and saved the logistics on my big project. Without you, we would have gone under. I just smiled gently. We do what we can, Richard I replied calmly. The silence around us was thick enough to cut. Guests whispered. Vivian's carefully built web of lies crumbled in seconds. She'd tried painting me as nobody, but her own father had just handed everyone the proof that I was anything but. Logan stood there looking back and forth between us like a little kid who just realized he didn't know how the world really worked. Vivian tried to salvage it. Dad, of course. You know Mom Whitaker. She's just looking a little different tonight, she stammered. Richard gave his daughter a stern look. Different. She's one of the sharpest businesswomen I've ever met. Vivian. I hope you're treating her with the respect she deserves in her own home. Those words hit like a slap. Suddenly, everyone understood exactly who really owned the property. I gently pulled my hand from Richard's and nodded at Vivian. Shall we head inside? After all, it's your birthday. The rest of the evening played out like a slow-motion nightmare for Vivian. While she tried to keep a brave face, guests passed me around like I was the guest of honor. These were people who either already knew me or had just learned the truth from Richard. I didn't dwell on the house or the petty crap from the past months. I talked market trends and old deals instead. Information was my sharpest weapon, and I used it with precision. In a quiet moment by the buffet, Vivian cornered me. Her voice shook with barely contained rage. "What the hell is this show, Eleanor? Where did you get the car and the money for these people?" She dropped the mom for the first time in ages, which suited me just fine. I spooned a small portion of salmon onto my plate and looked her straight in the eye. "The car belongs to an old friend. And the money. It was always there, Vivian. I just stopped letting you have access to it." She let out a nervous laugh. "What are you talking about? Logan handles the accounts." I took a bite, chewed slowly, and swallowed before answering. "Logan handles what I left him to handle. This morning, I revoked the powers of attorney on the main company account and the house account. Since I'm the majority owner, it was just one quick call to the bank." Vivian's eyes widened. She was probably thinking about all those big unpaid bills for this party still sitting on her desk. "You can't do that. We have obligations," she hissed. I stepped a little closer into her space, staying perfectly calm. "I can." And I did. "The money belongs to whoever's name is on the paperwork, and that's mine." I watched her gasp for air. She suddenly realized the party she was throwing might be the last one she could afford in this style. I left her standing there and went back to the other guests. After the party, the ride home in their much smaller limo was dead silent. Back at the house, Vivian looked ready to explode in the hallway, but I just raised my hand. "Not tonight." "We'll talk at breakfast tomorrow," I said firmly, then closed the door to my ground floor apartment. I heard her yelling upstairs, the sound muffled through the ceiling, but it didn't touch me. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I was already at the kitchen table when they came down, both pale with dark circles under their eyes. Vivian opened her mouth, but I set 3 envelopes on the table. "Here are the new house rules," I said, matter-of-factly. "First, rent on the upper unit goes to market rate next month and comes straight out of Logan's paycheck. Second, the powers of attorney stay revoked. Any major company expense goes across my desk." Logan stared at the envelopes like they might bite him. "But Mom, we're family," he mumbled. I looked at him without anger, just deep disappointment. "Family respects each other, Logan. You let your wife treat me like hired help while you spent my money. That stops today." Vivian tried a different angle. "This is blackmail. We can't afford our life if you cut us off." I gave her a cool smile. "It's not blackmail. It's basic accounting. If you can't afford the lifestyle, you'll have to change it. I'm not bankrolling your ego trips anymore, Vivian." I stood up and picked up my coffee mug. "And if you're thinking of moving out, feel free. I've already got an ad ready for the upper unit. Demand's high in this neighborhood." Vivian looked like I'd slapped her. They'd never imagined I'd actually be willing to let them go. The next few weeks brought an odd kind of quiet. Vivian tried ignoring me at first or slipping me little chores, but I just didn't respond. If she left laundry for me, it sat there. If she expected me to cook, my kitchen stayed dark. I started filling my time with things that actually brought me joy: museum visits, catching up with old friends, and taking a real hand in the company paperwork again. Once Logan came down to my place, looking desperate. "Vivian's been complaining nonstop. She says we can't make the lease payments on her car anymore. Can't you make one exception?" I sat at my desk, reviewing an inventory list. "Logan, that car is a luxury. If the money's not there, she'll have to return it. I'm not responsible for her garage full of toys." He dropped his head. "She says you're being cruel." "No," I replied. "I'm just finally being consistent." I noticed the whole dynamic in the house shifting. Vivian was no longer the proud queen barking orders. She seemed tense and unsure of herself. She'd learned her power had only ever rested on borrowed money. One afternoon, I saw her in the yard, mowing the lawn herself, a job she used to dump on me or hire an expensive gardener for. I watched from the window for a moment, then went back to my book. The most important thing was protecting my own boundaries. I changed the lock on my basement storage where she'd stashed her winter tires without asking. I set them outside her door without a word. There were no more big arguments, just clear consequences. Vivian slowly realized that every attempt to manipulate me came with an immediate logistical price. No respect, no privileges. That was the simple system I'd put in place. Vivian made one last desperate play. She set up a meeting with her father and invited me, hoping he'd back her up and talk some sense into me. We met at a cafe. Richard looked more amused than angry. Vivian mentioned some financial tensions. Eleanor, he started diplomatically. I nodded. There are no tensions, Richard. Just a return to the legal reality. Vivian nearly burst with fury. She's taking everything from us. Dad Logan barely has access to the accounts anymore. We're living like broke college kids. Richard looked at his daughter for a long moment, then shook his head. I always told you not to underestimate the person who laid the foundation. Eleanor built this wealth. If you wanted her to share it, maybe you should have treated her better. That was the moment Vivian finally lost all hope. Her own father sided with me not out of sentiment, but out of respect for what I'd accomplished. He knew I was right. As we left the cafe, I saw Vivian fighting back tears. They weren't tears of regret, though just pure rage at losing her power. I felt no pity. Pity would have required her to have actually learned something. She was only mad her plan had backfired. We're moving out, she hissed at me on the way out. Go ahead, I answered calmly. I've already prepared the paperwork to end the internal lease if you don't leave willingly. It'll all be handled properly. Logan stood there saying nothing. He'd stayed a follower, unable to take a real stand. I looked at him and realized I had to let him go so he might someday learn to stand on his own 2 feet. He'd have to pay the price for his passivity. The move-out happened without huge drama, but the air was icy. They'd found a smaller place on the edge of town that they could actually afford on Logan's regular salary. Vivian didn't even look at me as they left. Logan gave my hand a quick, almost apologetic squeeze, but I gently pulled away. He needed to feel what it meant to take responsibility for his own life and marriage without my financial safety net. The house suddenly felt much bigger. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore, it was freeing. I walked through the empty upper unit. The walls were bare, the floors shining. I felt no sadness about them leaving, just deep relief. I hadn't only gotten my money and my house back, I'd reclaimed my dignity. I wasn't the poor widow anymore. I was the woman I'd always been. I hired a painter to freshen up the upstairs. I decided not to rent it out right away. Maybe I'd turn it into a studio or just keep it for guests I actually wanted around. I had control of my space again. No more loud fights overhead. No condescending whispers on the stairs. It was my house, and my rules now reached every corner. That evening, I sat on the terrace with a glass of wine. I thought back over the past months. It was amazing how fast the power balance could shift once you stopped explaining yourself and started acting. I hadn't needed schemes or the police. I just needed the courage to say no and follow through on the consequences. I looked out at the garden and saw the first flowers blooming. It was a new beginning late in life, but right on time. A year later, I was back at the plaza this time as an invited guest to a gala for the local Chamber of Commerce. They seated me at the head table. Richard Caldwell was there too, and we had a lively conversation about new development projects. He mentioned that Logan and Vivian had split up. Logan was working hard in the company now, trying to make things right. Vivian had moved back in with her parents and was hunting for a new income source. It barely touched me. I'd learned you can't change people, but you can change how much room you give them in your life. My days were quieter now, but far more fulfilling. I'd started a small foundation for young women entrepreneurs and was passing on what I knew. People no longer looked at me with pity. They saw a woman who knew her own worth. When I look in the mirror these days, I don't see a fragile old lady. I see someone who's finally made peace with her past. Sometimes when I walk through the house at night, I think back to that gold invitation lying on my kitchen table. It had been the spark for everything. Vivian thought she could destroy me with that party. Instead, she woke me up. I ran my hand along the stair railing and smiled. The house was quiet, but it was a living, breathing kind of quiet. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. If anyone ever tries to label you as just something, just a mom, just a wife, just an old woman, remember this story. You don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to hold tight to the keys of your own life. I stepped out onto the balcony and looked up at the night sky. The stars shone bright over my house, my domain. And I knew the best chapters were still ahead, written in my own time, on my own terms. I never said a word to prove I was right. I simply took away their ability to look down on me. And that was more than enough.